Welcome to our deep dive into middle childhood. We're going to be taking a look at cognitive development, that period between 6 and 11.
It's amazing how much growth happens in these few years.
Yeah, how kids learn, what they struggle with, what it means for their education.
So much to unpack. We'll explore those changes and what makes this stage so important.
Yeah, and we've got a great lineup to help us understand it all. Piaget, Vygotsky.
Even some newer research on information processing.
Right. Get ready for some of those aha moments.
I think we'll have a few of those.
Okay, so first up, Piaget and his famous concrete operational thought.
Ah, Piaget, a classic.
I remember learning about it in my psych classes, but it always felt kind of vague. What does that really mean for, how a kid learns?
Well, think of it this way. You know how tough it is to explain something abstract to a 7-year-old? Like freedom or justice.
Oh, yeah, they just don't get it.
Right, because their thinking is still very grounded in what they can experience directly. Piaget called it concrete because kids this age, they need to see it, touch it, to really understand.
Okay, so that classic example.
Yeah.
A kid finally gets a lump of clay. It's still the same amount, even if you change its shape.
Yeah.
Conservation, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a big deal. Shows they're starting to understand that appearances can be deceiving and that quantities remain the same, even when their form changes.
So no more arguments about who got more juice just because it's in a taller glass.
Uh-huh. Well, maybe fewer arguments. But remember, they're still mastering this idea.
That is so helpful. I'm totally seeing those arguments in a new light now. So it's not just about quantities either, right?
Yeah.
They start to classify things in more complex ways too.
Right, like they can understand that a daisy is both a flower and a daisy, belonging to multiple categories at once.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Might sound simple, but it's a huge leap forward in their logical thinking. Helps them organize their world.
And then there's seriation, which always makes me think about those toys where you have to stack rings from smallest to largest.
Exactly. Seriation is about putting things in order, whether it's rings, the alphabet, numbers.
Huge for understanding sequences, like in math or even just daily routines. Right?
Exactly. Like getting ready for school. It's a whole series of steps, and that becomes much easier to manage thanks to seriation.
Wow. Even simple tasks like getting ready in morning involve these complex cognitive skills. Okay, so Piaget's all about those hands-on experiences. But now let's bring in Vygotsky. He had a different take, right? More social.
Absolutely. For Vygotsky, that social world is key. He argued that kids learn best through what he called guided participation, basically interacting with someone more skilled.
So like working with a teacher, a parent.
Even another kid who's a bit ahead. It's about collaboration, sharing knowledge.
So it's not about waiting for a child to magically figure it out on their own.
Right. It's about actively supporting them as they stretch their abilities. And a key concept here is the zone of proximal development, or ZPB.
Ah, yes, the ZPD. Another one of those terms that sounds a bit intimidating.
It's actually pretty simple. Think of it like this. A kid learning to ride a bike. They can almost do it, but they need you holding on for balance.
Okay, I get it. That's the ZPD, where they need that little bit of help to master a new skill.
Exactly.
So instead of rote memorization, Vygotsky would say help kids understand the why behind things.
Yeah. Make those connections through conversations, play, real-world experiences. He saw all those social interactions as shaping a child's thinking, making school, family, the community all essential.
Okay, so we've got Piaget and Vygotsky, two giants of developmental psychology. But there's another way of understanding how kids think that's really helpful, the information processing model.
This one's really fascinating. Think of the brain like a computer. This model focuses on how children take in information, process it, store it, and then retrieve it.
Like becoming a super efficient little computer.
It's all about becoming a more efficient thinker, not just faster, but how they manage and use information.
So it's not just about becoming a speed reader then.
Well, speed is part of it, but the key idea here is automatization.
Okay, automatization. Tell me more.
Think about something like tying your shoes. You don't even think about it anymore, right?
Yeah, it's just automatic.
That's automatization. And it's happening all the time in kids' brains. Remember how tough it was to sound out every letter when you were first learning to read?
Oh, totally. And now I can read without even thinking about it.
Exactly. That's because your brain created a shortcut through practice.
So, my brain was doing some serious optimizing behind the scenes.
And this applies to all sorts of skills. Math facts, writing your name, even riding a bike.
So our brains are constantly getting more efficient, making room for new learning.
And the more you know, the easier it is to learn new things. You build on that knowledge base.
It's like having a bigger mental filing cabinet.
Right, but it's not just about quantity, it's also about what we call control processes, sometimes called executive function.
Control processes. Sounds intense.
It's like the brain's CEO, helping you plan, organize, stay focused. And it's where things like emotional regulation and theory of mind come in. Understanding other people's perspectives.
So control processes are what keep everything running smoothly, even if things get more complex.
Exactly. And during middle childhood, these control processes, they get a lot more sophisticated. Allows kids to handle more challenging stuff, solve problems better, and manage their emotions.
Okay, so we've got all these incredible cognitive abilities developing. But how does that translate to real-world learning, especially in the classroom?
That's where things get really interesting, because now we have to consider the environment and all those social interactions.
And that hidden curriculum you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. It's not just about what's being taught explicitly, but those subtle messages kids pick up in school, just from how the classroom is set up or the teacher's expectations.
Okay, so like, is speaking up encouraged? Or is it more about quiet attentiveness? Those unspoken rules can really shape a kid's experience.
They really can. And, those cues can be very different across cultures. It shows how there's no single right way to teach, like even something as simple as the seating arrangement.
Oh yeah, rows versus tables.
Yeah.
That sends a message about what's valued.
Right. And even something as subtle as how a teacher responds to a question can have a big impact.
That's fascinating. So it's almost like there's this invisible script that kids are picking up on.
A script that guides their behavior and shapes their beliefs about learning. And that script can be influenced by so many things: cultural norms, societal expectations.
Even a teacher's personal beliefs.
Exactly. But the good news is, by becoming aware of these messages, we can start to challenge them and create more effective learning environments, ones that are more inclusive and equitable for all kids.
Well said. Okay, so we've got this hidden curriculum at play, but we also have these very real differences in educational systems around the world. We talked a little bit about Finland's success, but I'm curious about how other countries approach education.
Especially those that consistently score high on those international tests, right? Like the TIMSS or PISA.
Right. What are they doing differently?
Well, one example that often comes up is East Asian countries like China, Japan, South Korea.
I've heard a lot about their systems.
They often top those international rankings, and their education systems tend to emphasize academic rigor, discipline, high expectations.
So a lot of focus on testing and memorization.
Yes, there can be a lot of that. But it's important to note that these countries are also starting to recognize the need for more creativity and critical thinking. They're moving away from just memorizing facts.
So it's evolving.
It is. They're trying to find that balance. And another thing that's interesting is the huge role of parents.
Oh, parental involvement for sure.
Parents are highly invested in their kids' education, a lot of support with homework, tutoring.
It's seen as the path to success.
Right, which makes for an interesting contrast with the U.S., where that parental involvement can vary so much.
Depends on so many factors here.
Exactly. Socioeconomic status, cultural background, even just a family's beliefs about education.
It seems like the U.S. is always trying to find that balance, between pushing for academic rigor, but also supporting kids' well-being.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. But by looking at these different approaches around the world, we can learn so much about what works.
It's like a global experiment in education.
In a way, it is. And what we're learning is that there are many pathways to success.
And that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to education. Okay, so we've got these big picture comparisons, but I also want to get into those day-to-day interactions in the classroom. How do those cultural differences play out, on the ground?
I'm glad you brought that up, because it really gets at how those hidden messages are being communicated. Even something like how a teacher responds to a student's mistake can be revealing.
That's a great example. In some cultures, mistakes are seen as like opportunities for learning, part of the process.
Right. But in other cultures, there's more of a sense of shame around mistakes. Can make kids reluctant to take risks or ask questions.
And that can really stifle a child's natural curiosity and willingness to learn.
Absolutely. And this is where teacher training and cultural sensitivity are so crucial. Teachers need to be aware of these potential biases and create classrooms where all kids feel safe to participate.
Safe to learn in their own way.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process. We're all constantly learning and evolving as educators.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground on the cultural side of things, but let's bring it back to the individual child. We've talked about Piaget, Vygotsky, information processing.
A lot of theories.
But how do they all fit together?
Yeah.
How do they help us understand that cognitive journey a child goes through?
Well, you can think of these theories as different lenses. Each one gives us a different perspective on the same phenomenon. Piaget helps us understand the stages of development, the importance of hands-on experiences.
Right. And Vygotsky emphasizes those social interactions, the role of mentors.
Exactly. And the information processing model gives us a peek inside the brain, helps us understand how kids become more efficient learners.
So it's not about choosing one theory over another. It's about using them all together to get a more complete picture.
Exactly. They complement each other. And it's important to remember these are just theories. They're frameworks. They don't capture the full complexity of human development.
Right. Every child is unique, and their journey is going to be influenced by so many factors.
Their genes, their culture, their experiences. It's a complex interplay.
It's like we're trying to map this vast and ever-changing landscape, and these theories give us some helpful landmarks to guide us.
I love that analogy. And it highlights the importance of observation, curiosity, and a willingness to let go of our preconceived notions about how kids should learn.
We need to meet each child where they are.
And support them on their own unique path. And that's where passionate, dedicated educators come in.
They're the ones who can create those magic moments that spark a lifelong love of learning.
Absolutely. And speaking of sparking a love of learning, one of the most remarkable things that happens during middle childhood is that explosion of language.
It's like watching a flower bloom in fast forward. They're learning new words every day.
It really is. And it's not just about vocabulary. It's about understanding grammar, telling stories. They're becoming masters of language.
Using it to think, communicate, connect with the world.
Exactly. And that mastery of language, it's essential for success in school and beyond.
But, as we discussed, not all kids have the same opportunities when it comes to language development. There's so many factors that can create barriers.
Like poverty. It can significantly limit a child's exposure to language.
And that can have a ripple effect on their academic performance.
You can. Because if you're struggling to understand the words, it's hard to grasp the concepts. But it's not just about the number of words a child hears. It's also about the quality of those interactions.
So back and forth conversations being read too.
Having their questions answered. They need opportunities to practice those skills, to get feedback.
So even something as simple as having dinner together as a family and talking about your day can be a huge language booster for kids.
It really can. And reading aloud, it's like a superfood for the brain.
It exposes them to new vocabulary, different ways of using language.
It expands their world in so many ways.
Okay, so language is key, but what about other cognitive skills? What are those big milestones that kids are hitting during middle childhood when it comes to memory, attention, problem solving?
Well, one of the most significant is the development of working memory. You know, that mental workspace where we hold information while we're processing it.
It's like our brain's RAM, right?
Exactly. And during middle childhood, that working memory capacity increases dramatically.
Which makes sense. I remember feeling like my brain could handle more around that age.
Right. And they're also developing better strategies for managing their working memory, learning how to chunk information together, rehearse things, use mnemonics.
So they're becoming more strategic learners.
Exactly. And that's a key aspect of what we call metacognition.
Thinking about thinking.
Right. It's that ability to monitor your own understanding, to adjust your learning strategies when you need to.
So it's like becoming the CEO of your own brain, making those executive decisions about how to learn best.
Exactly. And as kids get better at this, they become more independent learners.
They can take charge of their own education.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not just about filling their brains with facts. It's about teaching them how to learn, those lifelong learning skills.
That's exactly it. And those skills are essential for navigating the world we live in.
A world that's changing faster than ever.
Now, we've talked a lot about those cognitive leaps, but I also want to touch on the social and emotional side of things. How are kids' relationships evolving during this time? How are they seeing themselves?
It's such a crucial part of development.
It really is. Middle childhood is a time of huge social and emotional growth. Kids are becoming more independent.
They're branching out, making new friends.
Right. Their social circles are expanding beyond just their family, and they're developing a deeper understanding of their own identity.
It's like they're figuring out who they are in the world.
Exactly. And this can be both exciting and challenging.
I can imagine. Navigating those social dynamics, the ups and downs of friendships.
It's a lot to handle. And it's also when they start comparing themselves to others more.
Trying to figure out where they fit in.
Right. And that social comparison, it can be motivating, but it can also lead to anxiety, especially if they feel like they're not measuring up.
So it's about finding that balance,
Yeah.
right? Encouraging them to strive for their best, but also protecting their self-esteem.
Absolutely. And this is where parents and educators play a crucial role by providing love and support, by celebrating their unique talents, by teaching them how to cope with setbacks. We can help them navigate those social and emotional challenges.
Creating that safe space where they can experiment and grow. So it's about nurturing their emotional well-being as much as their cognitive abilities.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that those two are intertwined. They influence each other in profound ways.
So a child who feels secure and supported is more likely to be a confident learner.
Absolutely. And a child who's struggling socially or emotionally might have a harder time focusing in school.
It's all connected. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. Piaget, Vygotsky, the information processing model.
We've touched on so many fascinating aspects of cognitive development.
And I think we've laid a solid foundation for understanding how those 6 to 11-year-old brains are working.
I agree. We've explored the stages, the theories, the social and cultural influences.
We've even talked about the power of language and the importance of nurturing the whole child.
And that sense of wonder and curiosity that drives their learning.
It's been an incredible journey so far, but we're not done yet.
There's still so much more to discuss.
When we come back, we'll delve even deeper into some of the key takeaways from our deep dive and explore some practical strategies for supporting children's learning and development during these crucial years. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into middle childhood cognitive development. Right before the break, we were talking about how kids' social and emotional lives were changing so much during this time, and how that all ties into their learning, too.
Yeah, it's such a crucial piece of the puzzle. We can't separate cognitive development from those social and emotional experiences.
Exactly. So let's pick up where we left off. We were talking about those social comparisons kids start making as they get older, and how that can be tricky.
It can be. On the one hand, it pushes them to try harder to develop their talents.
They want to be like their friends, or maybe even those they look up to, right?
Right. But it can also lead to, feeling insecure or doubting themselves, especially if they're comparing themselves to kids who seem, more advanced in some way.
So it's a delicate balance, isn't it?
Mm.
We want to encourage kids to be ambitious, but we also have to protect their self-esteem.
It really is. And that's where parents and educators come in, by providing unconditional love and support, by celebrating their unique strengths, and by teaching them healthy ways to cope with challenges.
You can help them navigate those choppy waters.
Exactly. We need to create a safe space for them to explore those social roles, to practice those social skills, without feeling judged.
So it's not just about teaching them math facts or grammar rules. It's about helping them develop those emotional and social skills too.
Absolutely. And it's just as important for their overall development. It all works together.
Like a beautiful tapestry, right? All those threads interwoven.
I love that analogy. And it reminds us that we need to look at the whole child, not just their academic progress, but their well-being too.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about those big theoretical frameworks like Piaget and Vygotsky and the information processing model. But now I want to get practical. What are some things parents and educators can actually do to support kids' learning during this stage, based on all this research?
Well, one of the most important things is to remember that kids this age are concrete thinkers.
Yeah.
So hands-on activities, real-world examples, those are key.
So less abstract lectures, more hands-on exploration. I like it.
Exactly. And Vygotsky talked about the importance of guided participation, right? So create those opportunities for kids to learn from others, ask them questions that get them thinking, help them make those connections.
Even just those everyday conversations can be so valuable.
They can. Like even a trip to the grocery store could be a learning experience.
Oh, for sure. Talk about quantities, prices, making choices. So it's about finding those teachable moments in everyday life.
And don't forget about play. Play is such a powerful way for kids to learn and grow.
Play is so important.
It is. It helps them develop their social skills, their creativity, their problem-solving abilities.
So many benefits.
And it's also just plain fun, which is important too. Kids learn best when they're engaged and enjoying themselves.
Okay, so we've got hands-on activities, we've got social interaction, we've got play. What else? Any tips for strengthening those control processes we talked about, those executive functions?
Great question. There are a lot of fun ways to work on those skills. Games and activities that involve planning, sequencing, and problem solving are great.
I'm thinking puzzles, board games.
Exactly. Even simple things like helping to plan a family outing or organize a game night, These activities help kids practice those executive function skills in a way that's engaging and fun.
So they're not even realizing they're working on those skills. They're just having fun.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that mistakes are part of the process. Don't be afraid to let kids mess up and try again.
Encourage that growth mindset, where they see mistakes as opportunities to learn.
Absolutely. And remember, learning should be joyful. When kids are excited and having fun, their brains are primed to learn.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of practical tips. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to touch on something we discussed earlier, the hidden curriculum.
Ah, yes, that invisible script.
Exactly. What are some things parents and educators can do to make sure those messages are positive and supportive?
Well, the first step is awareness. Just paying attention to the language you use, the feedback you give. Are you creating a learning environment that's truly inclusive, where all kids feel valued and respected?
So even little things like how we praise kids can make a difference.
They can. Praising effort over achievement, for example, can really help foster that growth mindset, and modeling a love of learning ourselves.
Showing them that we're all lifelong learners.
Exactly. Because learning is a journey. It's not about reaching some destination. It's about embracing curiosity and finding joy in the process.
Okay, so we've got these great insights from those big theories. We've got practical tips for supporting kids' learning. What about language? We talked about how important it is for everything, but what is some specific things we can do to help kids develop those language skills, especially those who might be facing challenges?
It really comes down to creating a rich language environment. Talk to kids, read to them, sing songs. The more language they hear, the better.
Expose them to a wide range of vocabulary.
And don't be afraid to use those big words. Just make sure to explain them. And for kids learning a second language, immersion is key.
Surround them with the language, make it fun.
Absolutely. Games, songs, movies. Find ways to make it engaging.
And remember, it's a journey. Celebrate those small steps. Encourage persistence.
Because every child learns at their own pace.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what are your final thoughts? What do you hope our listeners will take away from all of this?
I hope they'll come away feeling empowered and inspired. Empowered to support the children in their lives, and inspired by the incredible potential that every child holds.
Beautifully said. Middle childhood is such a pivotal time. It's when those cognitive foundations are being laid, those social and emotional skills are blossoming. It's truly amazing to witness.
It really is. And I think the most important thing is to remember that every child is unique. They learn in different ways, they have different strengths, they face different challenges.
So we need to meet them where they are, celebrate their individuality.
And nurture their love of learning.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an incredible journey.
It has, and I've learned so much from our conversation today.
Me too. I always love exploring these topics. It reminds me of how fascinating and complex childhood development really is.
And how much we can learn from simply observing and listening to kids.
That's so true. They have so much to teach us.
They do. Okay, well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Likewise. And to our listeners, until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those learning adventures going. Welcome back to our deep dives into middle childhood cognitive development. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling like my brain is doing some serious processing after all that.
It's a lot to take in, but it's so fascinating to see how all these pieces fit together, how kids' thinking changes during this time, all those social and emotional influences.
It really makes you appreciate how much is going on in those little brains. So much more than just memorizing facts.
Right. It's about building those foundational skills, those thinking habits that will serve them well throughout their lives.
So before we wrap up, let's do a quick recap. What are some of the key takeaways from our deep dive, those aha moments that can help us understand and support those amazing young minds?
Well, for me, one of the biggest takeaways is that development is holistic. It's not just about cognitive skills in isolation. It's about nurturing the whole child, their social, emotional, and physical well-being too.
Absolutely. It's so easy to get caught up in the academic pressures, those test scores, the competition.
But kids thrive when they feel safe, supported, and connected. That sense of well-being actually fuels their cognitive growth. A child who feels loved and accepted is more likely to be curious, engaged, eager to learn.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so thinking back to all those theories we discussed, Piaget, Vygotsky, information processing, what's one practical tip that comes to mind for parents and educators? Something they can do today to support a child's learning.
Create those rich, stimulating environments where kids feel empowered to explore, experiment, learn through doing, Remember Piaget? He emphasized those concrete experiences. So think hands-on activities, real-world examples, let them manipulate objects, see how things work.
So we're talking building forts, baking cookies, playing board games, all those fun things that are secretly packed with learning opportunities.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of those everyday conversations. Remember Vygotsky? He was all about social interaction and guided participation. Ask those open-ended questions. Encourage kids to explain their thinking. Help them make those connections between what they're learning and the real world.
Yeah, even something as simple as a trip to the grocery store can be a learning adventure. Talking about quantities, prices, making choices. It's all about those teachable moments.
And don't forget about play. Play is such a powerful way for kids to learn and grow.
Play is so important.
It is. It helps them develop social skills, creativity, problem-solving abilities, and it's just plain fun. Kids learn best when they're engaged and enjoying themselves.
Okay, so we've got hands-on activities, we've got social interaction, we've got play. What about those control processes we discussed? That brain CEO that's trying to keep everything organized. Any tips for strengthening those executive function skills?
There are lots of fun ways to work on those. Games and activities that involve planning, sequencing, and problem-solving are great.
I'm picturing puzzles, strategy games.
Exactly. Even just helping to plan a family outing or organize a game night. These activities help kids practice those skills without even realizing they're working on them.
They're just having fun. I love it. And it's important to remember that mistakes are part of the process, right?
Absolutely. Encourage that growth mindset, where mistakes are seen as opportunities to learn and improve, not as failures.
And speaking of growth mindset, I'm thinking back to our discussion about the hidden curriculum. All those subtle messages kids pick up in school. What can parents and educators do to make sure those messages are positive and supportive?
It starts with awareness. Pay attention to the language you use, the feedback you give, the overall atmosphere you're creating. Are you fostering a sense of curiosity and excitement about learning? Or are you accidentally sending the message that mistakes are bad and that only certain types of learners are valued?
That's such a good point. Even little things like how we praise kids can make a big difference.
Exactly. Praising effort over achievement. Modeling a love of learning ourselves.
Showing them that we're all lifelong learners.
Exactly. Learning isn't about reaching some destination. It's about embracing curiosity and finding joy in the process.
Okay, so we've got all these amazing insights from Piaget, Vygotsky, the information processing model. What about the role of language? We talked about how crucial it is for learning and development, but what are some practical things we can do to support kids' language growth, especially for those who might be facing some challenges?
Talk, talk, talk. Engage kids in conversations, read aloud to them, sing songs, tell stories. The more language they hear, the better. Don't be afraid to use those big words. Just make sure to explain them. Think of it as building their mental dictionary one word at a time.
It's like a treasure hunt for new words.
And for kids learning a second language, those authentic language experiences are key. Find ways to immerse them in the language. Music, movies, books, even just chatting with native speakers, it all helps.
And don't forget the power of play. Kids learn language best when they're engaged and having fun.
Absolutely. So bring on the board games, the pretend play, the storytelling. The possibilities are endless.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into middle childhood cognitive development, I'm feeling so hopeful and inspired. It's amazing to see how much potential these young minds have.
Me too. And it's a privilege to be a part of their learning journey, to witness those aha moments, to help them unlock their full cognitive power.
Beautifully said. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those learning adventures going.